thank you so much for this opportunity, fantastic opportunity to present my project. Today, I'm going to talk about my one of my projects related to examining racial and ethnic disparities in the effect of diagnostic label of dementia. All right, so I don't have any commercial relationship to disclose, and this part of this study was funded by Rutgers University Internal Research Grant, and this is my research team. This project was only possible because of this fantastic team I have, so I'm so grateful. So before I explain and present my project, let me talk about my motivation for this project. I use a quantitative method, but I am a social worker, so I like a story. So I thought it's a good idea to share my story. About 10 years ago, I was working as a social worker in Japan. I was working with people who are older adults who are using home and community-based services. And I met this one, not this actual, this is not actual client. This is just the image, but I met one client. She was in her 80s. She was living with her husband in public housing. And her husband complained that she's exhibiting some wrong behavior. And he said her cognitive function is really bad. And I visited her, and the room, there was so many sticky notes. And I talked to her. She could make sense, total sense, but sometimes she repeat something she already said. So she's showing some signs of cognitive impairment or maybe dementia. And her husband really wanted her to see a doctor to get diagnosis. But one of her most important activities was going to group meeting with her old friends. She used public transportation to go there. So she refused to see a doctor because she didn't want to stop doing that. She knew that if she get diagnosis, people don't let her do that social activity. And I thought, oh, maybe we don't know about what happens when we give diagnosis to the person. Do we really know what makes the diagnosis for the people? So that's my motivation for this project, to look at the impact of disclosing the diagnosis of dementia. So I looked at the literature, and there are some studies. There are so many studies comparing people with dementia and without dementia, but there are relatively few studies examining the actual impact of diagnosis. I'll talk more about this in later slides, but anyway, according to the literature, there are some known benefits of giving dementia diagnosis. For example, the diagnosis gives opportunities to receive pharmacological or non-pharmacological interventions, which is pretty obvious. And it may provide sufficient time for future care planning, and it may mitigate potential safety issues, it prevent potential unsafe activities, and it may give psychological relief to the person and their family members. But I also found that there are some known negative consequences, such as increased psychological distress and post-traumatic stress, and even suicidal ideation. But many of, or maybe most of, studies are qualitative studies, and also small sample size. And also a huge gap is in the focus of effect on social relationship. There are few studies looking at the effect of receiving diagnosis on social relationship. So I thought theoretically, giving diagnosis may mobilize support network. So you have better network or larger network because you have dementia diagnosis. And it also may increase social support. I think that's one of the purposes of giving diagnosis. But maybe, like my case example, maybe it leads to social disengagement or isolation because Alzheimer's disease and related dementia is highly stigmatized condition. So I did I conducted my study, and also I did look at the literature. There are some studies available examining the actual effect of dementia diagnosis on social engagement. And according to these studies, dementia diagnosis may reduce social engagement. I looked at informal social engagement. So this 9 and 10 references, I think 10 is mine. And I looked at the formal social engagement. And also another study showed that frequency of engaging in outdoor activities is reduced after giving diagnosis. And my study also showed that dementia diagnosis did not change social network size and did not change perceived social support. The gap here is there's a lack of focus on received social support, the effect of Alzheimer's disease and related dementia diagnosis on received social support, because I only looked at perceived social support. And another huge gap is the lack of focus on the variability of the effect of diagnosis on social relationship. There is some evidence that the effect of diagnosis varies across racial groups. According to previous studies, non-Hispanic, Black, African-American, and Hispanic individuals may be less likely to be prescribed and less likely to be taking and less likely to continue taking anti-dementia medications. And they may spend less out-of-pocket costs related to ADLD, and they may be more likely to have serious psychological distress due to diagnosis of dementia. So there are some evidence in the literature available about the variations in the effect of diagnosis, but we don't know about the variations in the effects of diagnosis on social relationship. So this is the summary of the gaps in the literature. Many or most studies use small sample size, and the effect of a diagnostic label on receipt of social support has not been examined, and there's lack of focus on racial ethnic variations in the effect of a diagnostic label on social relationships. So to fill in the gaps, this study I'm presenting now aims to examine the effect of diagnostic label of ADLD on social relationship, including received social support. And also it aims to explore racial ethnic variations in the effect of a diagnostic label of ADLD on social relationships. I used data from health and retirement study. I think many of you know HRS, but just briefly, it's a nationally representative sample of US old adults who are 51 or older. They collect data biannually, and they collect data from about 20,000 participants from 1995, I think. And they oversample non-Hispanic, Black, and Hispanic in participants. So using this data, we created a pool sample of paired waves. And first wave as baseline and the second wave as follow-up. So 2000 and 2002, 2002 and 2004. Then I got this 175,805 person year observation, but we selected the sample according to these criteria. We excluded those who are younger than 70 at the baseline. This is mainly because of this dementia status criteria. So we selected only those who had dementia status predicted by Giannastacio Power dementia probability scores. So just briefly, what they did was there's a subsample of HLS called Adams, in which they collect data from about 1,000 participants about the detailed clinical assessment. And they use that sample as an answer and use machine learning technique to develop an algorithm to predict dementia status, better way to predict dementia status. So our sample includes only those who had dementia according to Giannastacio Power dementia probability scores in baseline and follow-up. So that criteria cut so many observations. And finally, we had 7,240 person year observation. So my interest was to look at the effect of having a diagnostic level of ADLD at the follow-up. And HLS asks the participants whether they had been told he or she has Alzheimer's disease or dementia, senility, or serious memory impairment. So this is my independent variable. And my outcome variables, I selected 6 variables related to social relationships under 3 categories. First category is social support. For receiving social support, for the informal social support, I use this question, this variable, and for formal social support, I use this question about paid helpers. So informal social support is you are getting help from someone about your household stuff. And formal support, you're getting help by paid helpers for your ADL and or IADL. That's my these are my social support variables. And for social engagement, I included 2 variables. First one is frequency of attending religious services. And the second one is whether or not the person spent any time volunteering. And the third category is social network. For social network, I chose 2 variables, whether or not children is living nearby, or and whether or not they have friends in their neighborhood. And HLS asks the participants if to choose one of the categories of racial and ethnic identity, such as white, Black African American, other, and I think they have detailed racial groups under other, but other racial group was not included because gender social power did not provide data for other racial groups, and also HLS also asks if the person is identify himself or herself as Hispanic or not. So we created these three racial ethnic identity categories: non-Hispanic white, non-Hispanic black, or Hispanic. And I use two sets of covariates. First set of covariates is to estimate propensity score of having a diagnostic label of ADLD at the follow-up. I included these covariates based on the thorough literature review. They are all known factors of getting diagnosis, not the risk factor of dementia, but the factors associated with getting diagnosed. And I also included covariates in the final regression model to adjust for the baseline difference. So as I briefly mentioned, my interest is in examining the effect of having diagnosis, not the difference between people with dementia and people without dementia. I'm interested in what happens if you give the diagnosis to the person. As you can see, we can't experimentally give diagnosis. I don't think we can do that. RCD is not feasible. So we use, however, if we compare those who are with dementia and without dementia, we don't know if people with dementia are not socially engaged or diagnosis made them socially disengaged. We don't know that. So that's why we use propensity score to adjust for the selection bias and to see the true causal effect of giving diagnostic label on social relationship. After estimating propensity score, we estimated the effect of having a diagnostic label of ADLD on social relationship with inverse probability weighting. And also we conducted subgroup analysis by each racial ethnic identity to explore racial ethnic variations in effect. We used P.005 with Bonferroni correction. So that's P.008 as a threshold for statistical significance. So this is the results. This is just sample characteristics. Some notable difference among racial groups is maybe not notable, but clear difference is education and household income. And also nursing home. So much more higher percentage of white individuals were living in nursing home. This is a balance table comparing all the covariates between people who didn't have diagnosis and people who had diagnosis. And left-hand side, this red marked table, this is for analysis without weight, unweighted result. And this side is weighted results. So if you compare people with diagnosis and without diagnosis, without using inverse probability weight, or but race, it's kind of interesting. All but race variables was statistically significantly different. However, applying for weight reduced the imbalance between samples, but some variables remain statistically significant. So we included these in the final regression model. And this is the result. So results showed that having diagnosis of dementia may increase informal social support and formal social receipt of informal support and receipt of formal support. However, it may not change children living nearby, the likelihood of children living nearby, and it may decrease having friends nearby. So it may not change social network, but even maybe negatively affect social network. And also giving diagnosis may negatively affect social engagement, as evidenced by the result show giving diagnosis may reduce the likelihood of engaging in volunteering and attending religious services. And this is the result from subgroup analysis. So this is the result of white-only sample. All similar results with this entire sample. I don't see nothing particularly interesting here. But if you look at the black-only sample, the significant, so I put this asterisk, but it means 0.05 before Bonferroni correction. So if you use Bonferroni correction, this is not statistically significant. So only Bonferroni corrected statistical significance was observed in having friends nearby. So in which the diagnosis reduced the likelihood of having friends nearby among non-Hispanic Black group, similar to white and entire sample. But all the other results were non-significant using Bonferroni correction. And for Hispanic only, I'm sorry, this is wrong, Hispanic only. For Hispanic only sample, all results were non-significant. Okay, so in sum, diagnostic level of ADLD may increase the likelihood of receiving formal and informal support. However, it may decrease social engagement. And also, it may not change or even decrease social network size. So this may be the reason why the person with diagnostic label and their family may be socially isolated. However, this effect on decreased social engagement and the effect of decreasing social engagement and decreasing social network size may be interrelated. So dementia diagnosis may decrease social network size, and that may be the reason why you have lower social engagement, or vice versa. But anyway, it may be interrelated, but this interrelational relationship was not examined in this study. Also, there was some evidence of racial ethnic variations in the effect of a diagnostic label, especially in the comparison between non-Hispanic white and non-Hispanic Black. We actually saw non-significant results for all outcomes in Hispanic individuals, but we think this may be a little bit too small. This sample may be a little bit too small to conclude anything. But I think comparison between non-Hispanic white and non-Hispanic Black was somewhat meaningful. So in some positive effects on receiving informal and formal support may not be present among non-Hispanic Black individuals, but we need further examination of heterogeneity among non-Hispanic Black individuals, because the direction of coefficient is same, but it's not just statistically significant in non-Hispanic Black only. So they may just have broader 95% confidence interval. So we need more examination. And also negative effects on social network size may be consistent across two groups. As we saw white only and Black only sample, we saw non-significant effect on child live nearby and decreasing effect on having friends nearby. So these results are similar in white and Black only sample. So yeah, but in Black only sample results, social engagement results were not significant. So that indicates dementia diagnosis may not reduce social engagement among non-Hispanic Black individuals. So maybe isolation experienced by people with diagnosis of dementia may not be due to the person's withdrawal, but maybe stigma of the people around the person. So because the reduce of the social network size is clear, but reduce of the social engagement is not so clear. We have some limitations. So sample size of Hispanic individuals may be too small, as I briefly mentioned. And although the Giannastasio Power Dementia Probability Score has race and ethnicity specific cutoff points, selection bias toward non-Hispanic Black and Hispanic may be present, because this score can be only calculated for those who are 70 years or older. So it's already biased a little bit. And as I briefly mentioned, outcome variables may be interrelated. So we are now conducting outcome-wide analytic approach to rule out the possibility of picking only variables which are statistically significant. Okay, so receiving diagnosis may increase informal and formal social support, while it may decrease social engagement. And the positive effects of diagnosis on social support may not be present among non-Hispanic Black, but racial ethnic variations are inconclusive. And further research should be conducted with larger sample. And also future research needs to examine mechanisms between a diagnostic level of ADLD and social relationship, why diagnosis increase social support and why diagnosis decrease social engagement is not known. So we need to examine that to identify strategies to maximize positive impacts and minimize negative ramifications of giving diagnosis. And that's it. Thank you so much.
A brief question?
Yes.
So, look, you described even structure and properties of diagnosis. So, do you understand why we have racial disparities just after diagnosis? Which component of the structure, maybe relationship or association, would be responsible and explain this disparity?
Yes. So no, because we don't have in what context that diagnosis was given. We don't. We can measure that how different it is. What the different experience of receiving diagnosis. We don't have that measure, but we can. I think we can look at some resource, because if you have more resource, maybe and diagnosis, that may lead to more sort of service utilization, versus if you have lower resource, diagnosis doesn't mean anything. So we can look at these contextual factors, but yeah, more nuanced experience maybe to examine if that. Yes.